Good morning, church. Um, Glad you're here. And yes, my name is Pastor Cody, filling in the pulpit this morning for Pastor Kyle, and usually doing all things operational, make things work. Having some technical difficulties with the mic, so I'll use the handheld as we figure that one out. As usually I'm in the back figuring that out. So I'll just be up here and let people know what they were doing. So I do want to take this moment as Pastor Kyle's family. We're able to get away for a minute, have some family time, be back on the east side worshiping with their family, just to express gratitude for the way our church has handled the recent transition. And I know it seems pretty normal now, a couple months in, to be listening to Pastor Kyle and have him here, just for the way you guys were hospitable during his transition of finding a home for his family, having him over for meals, seeing if they need anything, offering support when they did actually move, if they need something. Just throughout it, the way we're able to bless Ray on the way out with a generous gift. And it's just been a great thing to see at a pastoral end and through churches and the different resources that you see and you read and you try to prepare for and help a church go through. That was really and honestly a great thing, not only for me personally, just for our church and for our church body and our strength to go through that so graciously. And so I did want to thank everyone for their part in that for Ray. In a couple of months, we will hear a report from him and see what he's been doing and what's God been doing in his mission work. And so we're glad to bring him back so that he can share what God's been doing in his ministry, but also as we see Kyle develop and go and teach and fall under his leadership as a church. So that has just been great. So this morning we're going to be in the book of Habakkuk. So we're going to take a little bit of pause on what Pastor Kyle's been going through the covenants to settle on a book that I think has prevalent for our time, for our season of life, for the year that we have coming up. And so it is an Old Testament and it's a minor prophet book, but it does profound insights for this faith and justice and nature. We'll see through God's response this morning and what stands out about it. The book is a powerful explanation and insight into a conversation, a divine conversation between the prophet Habakkuk and God on justice and suffering. So this morning, that's where we will be. There is not actually a whole lot of information in the Bible about the prophet Habakkuk or whatever ministries he does have. We do know that it's clear, and you'll see for the reading this morning, that he is a prophet of God, and he has been tasked with taking that message to God's people of Judah in his time, and we know that his vacation there. And so for the co-opers in here, as we're a family-friendly service and love having kids in our service and to be able to engage in that way, the reason we have this and where we're at contextually, if you remember last year, going through the crazy cycle of God's judgment for a rebellious people and how he disciplines them and then sends a judge and brings them back, we are at the time where God is going to discipline his people. And so if you're taking notes, that is where you are at in this crazy cycle of sin that the people of Judah are in. Another thing as we read, to kind of open it up, I should turn there myself, with Habakkuk is the first line of the first statement in the Old Testament that gives us a really good contextual feel of where he is at. Get there. Wasn't planning on having the mic. Notepads there, so they're easily to, because we will be someplace else other than Habakkuk this morning, so I want to make sure I can flip there quicker, one-handed this morning. So I was doing a little prep work. So as you can see, the first one right there in verse 1 says, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. So right there, the oracle tells us this is a prophecy, right? This is something that he actually saw. This is a vision that he has, more than just a vision of some of the other prophets. This is a conversation that he is having. So it's not just a vision that he saw as they write down. This is a divine conversation that Habakkuk had with God that opens us up to another contextual resource that we need to understand before we go into this, not only knowing that this is a conversation that actually took place between Habakkuk and God that was recorded, but it's also a timing aspect of what is going on in the world around them. And so this is between a time of when the Babylonian Empire is coming to power. It is between the defeat of Egypt and Nebuchadnezzar's first capture of Jerusalem. And so we see right before this in the prophet Nahum, we see the coming of the end of the Assyrian Empire, but Habakkuk witnessed it and watched this uprising of the Babylonians, or what you'll see in the text known as the Chaldeans. Those were the people called that. And so Judah, who he's being the prophet and leading, is one of several of these smaller states struggling with this dangerous transition of powers and empires, right? They're smaller with political power, with military power, their stance in the whole thing. And so they are struggling in this time as they watch other nations be invaded and taken over by this rising empire. So this morning, my goal is we're going to look at man's understanding of God's sovereignty, followed by God's revelation of his sovereignty to man that is paralleled with God's display of his sovereignty to man, which then results in God's display of his sovereignty to man, which is ultimately to trust in the sovereignty of God. So that is where I plan on leading us this morning. And so I'd like to begin with if that is where we're going at the end with trust, to begin with that question of how do we trust? How does someone, I'm good, I'll just use the handheld mic. Thanks, John. How do we trust psychologically? What parts of us engage in that aspect in our day-to-day lives? How are we created to experience this? And usually when we're trying to communicate that with one another, it comes out, just trust me, all right? Usually if you're trusting in someone who's saying something and you are not fully on board or have questions or doubts about it, a reply is usually, just trust me. And so whether you choose to trust that person or not totally depends on your experiences, your history, what you know about that person. Because I know a time in my life, let's call it high school, that we'd be coming across some pretty dangerous activities. And you kind of doubt with your friend group, should we be doing this? I don't know. Looks kind of dangerous. Not sure about this. And usually you have that one person who's like, dude, just trust me, right? Like he's got it all figured out. He did the calculations. He knows what you're about to do is pretty safe. He's done the risk assessment. You can trust him. Now, he's usually your friend in that situation is relying on their own self. But whether you put your faith in that trust and choose to trust that person in that moment is based on your experience. Has he done this before? Has things been succeeded? Is he trustworthy, right? If someone is not trustworthy, then just trust me doesn't really hold any weight in that conversation. And so this morning we have that same conversation with God and Habakkuk. And I know we'll see the outcome. And kids, I know I have your attention because we just started. And if you're writing notes, you can go ahead and put down, ask mom and dad, just trust me. And I'm sure they have a story they could share maybe at the dinner table or at small groups. It might be a good conversation starter after church today of just them to share a story when they were younger. If somebody said, just trust me, and kind of how it turned out for them, right? But you could use that as that teaching moment that we like to do as parents and further that conversation. Maybe it's a laugh. Maybe it turned out great. Maybe it didn't. But you can turn that into a conversation about whether your faith in that person from that moment on either strengthened or weakened based on your trust with their just trust me statement. So with that in mind, we'll get into the text this morning for this conversation that Habakkuk is going to have with God. And so we're going to read it section by section. We won't read the whole thing as we dialogue through it. And so let's start with reading verses 2 through 4 is where we'll start this morning. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and will you not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Habakkuk begins this conversation with a series of complaints. That's what it is, or a plea, in other words, to use, where he's questioning God on his actions. Why is he silent in the face of wrongdoings? It's important to notice that these are honest questions that seem to be a central theme in the book. They're not a way things ought to be. He's realizing this about his surroundings, about Judah. This is not the way it ought to be. He begins with a lament of sorts. How long? How long shall I cry for help? This crying is done what seems to be without an answer, without action from God. Violence does not seem to be coming with relief. We see the same language in Job, a well-known story of someone who was suffering in the Bible, who has very similar language in chapter 19, verse 7, where Job says, "Behold, I cry out violence, but I am not answered. I cry for help, but there is no justice." Even though the prophet cries out for rescue, God in his salvation is refusing to save. Relief is withheld. How long must he see this destruction of the society of Judah before him? Is the Lord going to do anything to stop it? There in verse 4. This plea is also reminiscent of King David and his plea to the Lord with his suffering. Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will your face hide from me? David's agony, Job's agony were real suffering. So is Habakkuk's. In these verses to follow, you'll see why, and they describe the condition that he is in with the people of Judah. You're going to see words like violence, injustice, wrongdoing, oppression, strife, and conflict. The leaders of their nation had forsaken the Lord and instituted their own laws, their own righteousness. They'd backslidden into idol worship that we've seen the pattern happen before again and again. We get from the Kings and Chronicles that after the demise of King Josiah, both the priesthood and the political leadership became corrupt. The spiritual reforms instituted by King Josiah had been short-lived after his timely death. And you see in verse 3 of Habakkuk's plea, why do you make me see iniquity? He is troubled at the wrongdoing that is taking place within God's people. These iniquities that are present on his landscape that I think if we were to put ourselves in the same position, we have a pretty good light with our current culture, our current society, of having the same troubled view. See, with a quick MLive search of some news articles, it's not hard to see this. One of them this past year was Kalamazoo homicides increased by 91% in 2023. Followed by this year's headline, Clean State Clinic in Kalamazoo to help those who are eligible convictions and criminals to expunge their records. Or how about the diversity, inclusion, the DEI that's been talked about a lot. Kalamazoo just reached their budget this last quarter with the article that stated, DEI is baked into everything into this Kalamazoo budget cycle. It became clear that DEI is not a standalone budget item anymore. Rather, it needs to be baked into everything. Or another one, LGBTQ plus studies released at Michigan State shine light on overlooked queer history. Universities such as Michigan, Michigan State, Grand Valley, Eastern, all now offer forms of LGBTQ plus or queer studies as a minor. And it's not just a secular either. As just last week, Kalamazoo area priest, 19 counted, accused of sexual misconduct. And if you try to think of people doing good, churches, right, coming back against society's backslidden. Again, August issue, MLive, a Kalamazoo, Michigan, a lack of trees is preventing a church in Texas Township from opening its new chapel. The zoning ordinance is requiring Pine Island Church to install evergreen trees or a fence or a wall between their property on Westview Ave and the neighborhood resident it butts up against to prevent a nuisance. So the zoning board defined the reason for making the church to not open, not only not operate, you cannot open your doors until you do this, to prevent an inconvenience or an annoyance to their neighbors. So I could keep belaboring this point of what we see in our current culture. It doesn't take long to look at any poll, any Gallup or Pew research to know the decline of the church, the decline of Christians. But it seems as though it keeps on going and going without God acting. Did they get away sinning and sinning more and more? Churches continuing to take more worldview stances versus holding ground to what the Bible says, and yet they continue to thrive. So the question we should ask ourselves in light of this and seeing our similar situation to what Habakkuk saw was, do we have the same response? Are we disturbed by what we see? Or are we concerned with the consequences of sin on humanity? I'm looking forward to every other week going through our Apply Week, where we get to look at Scripture and see, how does this apply to mankind? How does this apply to the world? See, if we don't take a stand or have a broken heart over mankind and the people we live around, our society, our culture, our city, then it will not be one for God's kingdom. It needs to be disturbing. We are to be the salt and the light to that darkness. So this, again, amplifies, even in our time or Habakkuk's, a time for a call for divine intervention, a call to repentance, to redemption, to save what is broken. So let's continue reading to see what God's reply to Habakkuk's plea for what he is seeing in Judah is, as we continue in verse 5 this morning. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth, who seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like eagles swift to devour. They all come for violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. They sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. We see God's reply is not one that Habakkuk might have expected. He was a bit surprised, I would say, as he starts his response with, look. Actually look, Habakkuk, and see outside. You wouldn't believe what I am doing. You cannot comprehend what I am doing. I am God, and I am going to use the Babylons and the Babylonian people as an instrument for my divine judgment against Judah, against their sin. He's revealing his sovereignty to Habakkuk in a theme that is presented in several prophetic books of using and how he uses judgment or divine intervention through nations to do this with his people. If you turn back in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9 of Isaiah 55, and his prophecy about God speaking says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God used this prophet to relay this message that the comparison between his thoughts are like heaven, and the higher standing of heaven than an earth. And this symbolizes the very difference between our wisdom and understanding and the wisdom and understanding of God himself. And so, although we can see that in God's sovereignty and in God's ways, he is revealing himself and his plans to Habakkuk for our understanding. So it did not answer the question that Habakkuk first raised about how long, when are you going to do something about this, as much as it was a reply to the accusation that God was idly standing by. And we see this surprise that Habakkuk had because of the way it describes the Chaldeans. Now, this is not my clever analogy, but one I find for verses 6 through 11. For these people are described in verse 6 as hostile, verse 7 as haughty, verse 8 as hastily, verse 9 as harmful, verse 10 as hardened, and verse 11 as hell-bent. And you can see the type of people that God is choosing to use as a divine instrument. And this really didn't set well with Habakkuk. Really? You're going to use them? They're worse than we are. How could you use them for a tool to do anything at all? Let alone be used by God for divine judgment on anyone else other than themselves. Something is still seriously wrong with what's happening in his perspective. So let's see how he responds back to God. We're going to pick up in verse 12 and read through chapter 2, verse 1 to see what doesn't settle quite right with Habakkuk. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You, who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong? Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallow up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his drag net. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his drag net. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Habakkuk is struggling to reconcile what he knows to be true about God and his theology of who God is with the first answer to his plea. His understanding of what he knows to be true, right? His past experiences, what God has already revealed to him. But he's not questioning or doubting God's plan. He's questioning and understanding. We can see this in the start of it in verse 12. For you are from everlasting. You are holy. We, of course, will not die. You will provide salvation for your people. I know this to be true about you, God. Later on, in 13, he continues to use this. You are holy. You're too pure to tolerate evil and wrongdoing. This is not right for God that I know to be doing this. And then he uses a metaphor in 14 through 16 about the fishermen, how God creates mankind like the fish of the sea, but the fishermen, being the Chaldeans, just toss out their nets, drag, in simulating the metaphor of taking over nation after nation, killing people, absorbing them. And what is their response? Is their success. They're rich. They're efficient in it. They are filled with good food and luxuries. and they worship their nets because it keeps giving them success. They've traded a truth for a lie by worshiping something in their success rather than someone. This theme we see echoed in the New Testament in Paul's writings on when he is explaining his letter to the Roman church and explaining the effect of God's wrath and what it has on the unrighteous. So if we want to turn and see what Paul has to say about this, we can go to Romans chapter 1, verse 22. So in Paul's letter, Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. It's interesting to see Paul's analogy on the pagan people that were in his day of God's judgment and his first step of just giving them over to their desires, their lust, their sin nature, to be unclean, resulting in their bodies that would be dishonored by it. See, in Paul's day, the Gentiles and the pagan culture multiplied many religious beliefs, served many gods, had different ceremonies. But in end, what was at the heart of it was a moral excuse for immoral living. They wanted to control the narrative of what they thought and believed to be true for themselves. How can I get what I want, and then I will worship that? So pagan idolatry is very prideful. It declares, I'm in control, I will worship what actually gives me success, I will decide what makes success, and therefore I worship it, and the cycle continues. But it's about control. The Chaldeans in Habakkuk's day created their own gods, praise and worship, their own style of beliefs, ultimately praising themselves for the power that they were continuing to consume by taking nation after nation and rising to power. So if you keep your finger there, or a nice little old name tag, we will come right back to Romans, because I think Paul's influence on Habakkuk is very influential for the next part of our study this morning. But we can see before we go on to God's second reply where Habakkuk stands now after his plea in chapter 2, verses 1. All right, he stands at his watchpost and waits. It's almost as like he's saying, I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm going to stand at the watchpost. I am going to be where I am called to be, which you can translate the watchpost, the tower, as a prophet would be taking a message to a people, and he is up at his place where he is supposed to hear the message from God and bring it, and he is saying, I will be where I am supposed to be, and whatever you tell me is the message I will deliver. Almost like he seems like he got the first reply, okay, I'm not going to get an answer to how long, other than I know that you're God, and it'll be in your own timing. So if we continue to read, we'll see God's reply in chapter 2, starting in verse 2. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that they may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects at his own all peoples. Shall not all these take up their tang against him with scoffing and riddles for him and say, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? Who loads himself with pledge? Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those who awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be soil for them, because you have plundered many nations, and the rampant of the people shall plunder you. For behold, a man of violence to the earth, to cities, and to all who dwell in them. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his net on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame on your house by cutting off many peoples. You have fortified your life, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and from the beam, from the woodwork, respond. Woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, it is not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations wearily themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord, as the water covers the sea. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk, in order to gaze at their nakedness. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beasts that terrified them. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities, and to all who dwell in them. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it, a metal image, a teacher of lies? For it makes trust in its own creation, rather than he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to the wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple, and all the earth keeps silence before him. I know this is a long passage, and we will briefly highlight what needs to be seen about God's response. But it's important to see first God's answer to him and how plain and clear his instruction is for Habakkuk to make it. And we see very early on one of the famous verses that gets put on Instagram posts and t-shirts, and verse 4 of chapter 2. But the righteous shall live by faith. So we see the wrath of God in his previous answer and what Paul had to say on this exact verse of the saving power. And so I want to turn there just as a highlight on this, how does righteous and being righteous living produce in this faith? So back to Romans real quick, chapter 1, verse 16 and 17. So to see that this is emphasizing an essential part of living when you're facing uncertainty, Paul has these words. Starting in 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. See, Paul is quoting Habakkuk in his letter to the Romans, who would have had the Old Testament scrolls at this time, belaboring his point of a foundation for the gospel, the foundation for righteousness and genuine faith. That the righteous are those who actually trust God, who put their faith in his sovereignty. So this vision is very similar in a way of genuine faith that trusts in God and his sovereignty produced in righteous living in that faith. If you flip over a few more pages, Galatians 3:11. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. And we'll read through verse 12. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. But the law is not of faith, rather the one who does them shall live by them. The foundation of righteousness in this gospel that Paul is saying, either to the Galatians or in Romans, or that we see here in Habakkuk, is making the argument for those who persistently live with their trust and their faith, not in the law, not by abiding to the law or the Jewish faith or doing everything correctly, but that the law could not do this, the law of Moses, because they would be counted as unrighteous. So to be righteous is to live in faith, not to abide by the law. So if there was only salvation in the law, then this would not make sense. To live by faith was contrast to the pagans. It was contrast to the way the Chaldeans and the nations around them, and even Judah at the time, were living, that they were not living by that as they had their own self-righteousness. They were making themselves their own gods. So let's go back to Habakkuk for a minute. And see that if we're going to have faith and to be righteous and to live in this faith, to actually trust in God's sovereignty, what divine justice looked like for the Chaldeans that he was able to reveal to them. So to sum it up, we can say that in that sections, verses 6 through 8, that they were going to be plundered by those who plundered them, or that they plundered. In 9 through 11, their security would be unsecure. 12 through 14, that their civilization was going to be devastated. And then in 15 through 17, that their glory was ultimately going to be turned to shame. Resulting in 18 through 20, we see what God is doing to those people and what the true result of worshiping their idols, that they'd be exposed as worthless. See, Habakkuk began this dialogue pretty frustrated with the state of his people and what was going on around it. And God's second response of where he is supposed to be and his instruction was silence. Verse 20. But the Lord in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silent before him. So when we find ourselves in our present state of our culture, maybe lamenting, crying out to God for what's going on, if he's actually active in doing something, maybe it's something we don't understand, do we find ourselves in the presence of worship, keeping silent before him where he is supposed to be in his temple? Worship often, each week, centers our heart on God and his saving power and grace. And so to be in the presence of God, to rightly worship him, sets our perspective a little differently of what we see the world in our day-to-day lives. We go to worship to be strengthened, to be encouraged, to be uplifted, to know the truth. It is also God's instrument for revealing himself to his people and seeing how it's actually lived out in faith. So to put God in his right place in his holy temple and to be keeping silent and having faith in his justice, Habakkuk then turns to his response in chapter 3, which I think is the proper response to when things we don't understand or to God's sovereignty. And so we'll look at that, finishing our reading this morning. Chapter 3. A prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, according to Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard the report of you and your work. O Lord, I do fear in the midst of the years, revive it. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. I'm going to stop right there for a second. As he begins this prayer, this song, he's confessing what he knows true about the Lord and asking him to look at his work. What we've just seen in the previous chapter, to look, to reveal it, to make it known to his people, accepting the fact that judgment is coming upon them, not questioning it anymore, accepting it, he cries out for mercy. In the midst of years, in wrath, remember mercy. See, without mercy, there'd be no opportunity for grace. Without mercy, there'd be no opportunity to save God's people. They would be destroyed for the judgment and the true justice for their sin. Without mercy, there's no salvation. So even though it is bad news for Judah that they are getting the just judgment that they deserve, we can still cry out for mercy. And we see God's response to that he will save. So he recounts this in the continuing verses. So we'll keep reading on, verse 3 of chapter 3. God came from Teman, and the Holy One of Mount Paran, Selah. His splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light rays flashing from his hand, and there he veiled his power. Before him went pestilence and plague, followed at his heels. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered, and everlasting hills sank low. His were the everlasting ways. I saw the tents of the Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of the Midian did tremble. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers? Or the indignation against the seas, when you rode on your horses and on your chariots of salvation? You stripped the sheath from the bow, calling for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and withered, and raging waters swept on, and deep gave for its voice. It lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their place, and at the light of your arrows they sped. At the flashing of your glittering spear, you marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations in anger. You went out for the salvation of your people and for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. You pierced with your own arrows the heads of its warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing if it would devour the poor in secret. You trampled the seas with your horses and surging of mighty waters. In this, God again displays his sovereignty in a remembrance that it is written down to a tune, to music, for people to actually remember this about God. But again, it calls, in the beginning, a remembrance of his exodus out of Egypt and what he did with his power on display. It also appeared to be with two weapons, this plague and pestilence. How his coming of the earth, these huge earthquakes and everything about it being shaken, his coming judgment and his deliverance. But also not only remember about what he has done physically in Egypt and the exodus of what you're reading, but the powers that he has to describe this cosmic battle. It's not just earthly. So he'd be the divine warrior that overcomes the darkness. The rivers, the mountains, the seas, the sun, the moon, all affected by his victory, his judgment, his plan. This language not only points us to hear the remembrance of what God has done through these times or through the people of earth, but also to see the powers at work. This assurance of victory over any problem or any complaint over the whole world, which reminds the reader or Habakkuk or those singing it of further victory that God has. You see, he ends his song, starting in 12 through 15, with 6 you statements about God in this power over the earth and over the heavens and over the cosmic powers. You marched through the earth in fury. You, God, threshed the nations in anger. You went out for salvation for your people. You crushed the head. You pierced with your arrows. You trampled the sea. God in his sovereignty is at work. He is not ever idle. And he is reminding his people through what he has done to just trust me. Right? I got this, bro. And in that light, we see Habakkuk's response to this remembrance. The people of Judah would see this response to the call to trust in God's sovereignty. For a proper response is how he ends. Verse 16. I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sounds. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. Yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on its vines, the product of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on the high places. To the choir master with strings and instruments. So we see here the answer to God's first answer to his plea does not change. But these final verses, we see Habakkuk's understanding of God's sovereignty and his proper response to God, and revealing that although, yes, it is bad news for Judah, that God is going to provide divine judgment through the capture with the Chaldeans, that instead of waiting for an answer to give people, he is now waiting for the fulfillment and resting in his assurance and his trust in what God is actually going to do. His heart has been transformed. This gets pretty applicable to us pretty quickly when we see the path that Habakkuk has gone on and how he has written it down for us today. I don't think we sing it, but we can definitely read it and know that it is good news to the nation of Judah, and our worldview can be shifted to that of a biblical view to know what is going around us is good news. God is at work. He is not idle. So we can watch as our nation spirals into this chaos of craziness or immorality and doctrine and teaching that is not in line with Scripture. We can see families being torn apart, city governments going the way, not of anything of their own, but as a culture, and say, oh, have a pity party or be down, or, oh, no, we need to just stand firm, just be in our own church, stay here, away, out of what's going on in the public. That's not us. We're going to stay here. But our response is one of actually heartbroken, mind-moving, action-oriented, of trembling at the sounds of what's going on. So the good news is not good news if we do not have faith that God is sovereign over everything that's happening. Habakkuk's journey from questioning his understanding of God to now modeling a proper response to what's going on can be a great tool for use of struggles and in times of chaos and times of uncertainty. Because do our ears and do our bodies, do we tremble? Do we quiver? Are we troubled the same way Habakkuk was with not only just himself, but the church, for us that's going on? And will we wait to see what the Lord has? There are a couple of bookable points I just want to end with real quickly to end our time. Because we can see through Habakkuk in this story of a great journey of wisdom really given through not only his personal dialogue with God, but giving it to us as a tool. And I know it's an overarching where they could probably all be each sermons, but just as we study it for one day, you can point out a couple of different things by being honest with God and trusting in his wisdom, being patient, living by faith, finding reasons to praise him. We can certainly, with steadfast hearts, trust God and live with faith. First one is embracing honest dialogue. It's okay to bring questions to God. It's okay to look around and say something's not right. And I encourage you to take those to God in the form of lament, in form of prayer, time of worship, where you see things that are broken. It's not a sign of weak faith to think that something's not right. It will strengthen and encourage you in times of prayer. It will deepen your relationship with God when you go to him with things that don't seem quite right. Second, trust in divine wisdom. Sometimes we're not going to understand what's going on. Sometimes we might have tunnel vision to know what's our current situation and not have a wider view of understanding that God's in control. Trusting in his wisdom and his plan, even though it might not make sense to us. Be patient and watchful. Maybe waiting is what we're called to do, especially when an answer is not immediate or we feel like we need an immediate answer. And in sickness and in times of need where we feel like we need the answer now. Patience is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It is something like we're going to study in James this past week that comes from testing of that patience. Praise in adversity. You see, even though in difficult times we can choose to focus on what we know the promises of God are true, and worship and in gratitude and praise God for the things to strengthen our faith. And finally, to actually live by faith. So again, I ask that question, how do you trust? Do you know God? Have you read his word and know his promises where you can come across a situation that's uncertain or unclear, or what seems to be evidently destructive around you? And do you know God? Have you had experiences in his word that you can rely on to say, okay, I don't understand. It looks pretty dangerous. I don't know, but I trust you. Are you living in that faith? Is it active of that faith in trusting God, that even though things in our state and our country, the lostness, the decline of Christianity, any suffering and pain that we might have because we're not going to use pronouns, will we choose to trust God in his sovereignty, knowing that we may not understand, but we're called to be righteous, living in that faith? So we may be like Habakkuk, learning to trust in God's justice, knowing that even in this midst of suffering, our faith will sustain us. Let's join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the word. Thank you for lessons that we can learn from Habakkuk's journey, as only we briefly touched it this morning. Help us to bring our questions and concerns before you in an honest form of wanting to seek understanding, to seek your wisdom. Lord, we pray for strength of our faith, whether it be in times of waiting and patience, in times of trusting you, not knowing, times of needing to act on our faith, that we do trust you and your sovereignty. Teach us to live with this kind of faith, to have joy in the presence, in the midst of adversity. Lord, you have constructed and put into place every person here, their life, their past, their future. Lord, help us to trust in your sovereignty, that bad news may be surrounding us, but it is good news that you are our God. In your Son's name, amen.